see his information and what he's sharing with everybody. So
no pressure, Peter. I mean,
none at all.
We're totally pumping you up here.
Yeah.
All right. Should we get to it, Mike?
I think we should get going. I think we get just about everything online. So yeah, let's talk a little bit. I just while you start talking, Sarah, I'm going to check the LinkedIn and make sure that we get enough people on LinkedIn Live as well. So kick us off.
Awesome. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Forge, the dawn of a new day. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. We are very excited and have an amazing lineup of dynamic speakers and topics based on your feedback. We designed today to be focused on you, the practitioners that make the industry what it is today. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I am the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, as well as CEO of Ships. And with me this morning, we were just chatting. I welcome, Michael Cadio, founder of Procurement Foundry, and the amazing community behind this event. So take it over, Michael, or Mike. I don't ever call you Michael, but this morning I decided I should.
I think Sarah's had an extra cup of coffee this morning, everybody. So yeah, thank you all for coming. Welcome to Forge. We're really excited for our second virtual conference. And we can't wait. We've put together a great lineup today, some new tricks up our sleeve. We've brought in a couple of sponsors for some lunch and learn sessions. We're doing a couple more live streams with keynotes today. We've got something amazing that Sarah cooked up called the Startup Showcase, where we're going to do 9 or 10 startups all at once. And they're going to do a 5-minute session in the afternoon. So we're really excited about that. Let me just tell you really quickly a little bit about the Procurement Foundry for all of you that are new to the Procurement Foundry and just visiting Forge for the first time. A lot of you signed up for Procurement Foundry just to get into the event. Procurement Foundry is a online micro community of practitioners for supply chain and procurement practitioners, indirect and direct procurement practitioners. We just crossed over 3,000 members this week, so we're really excited about that, actually. Thank you. Our 3,000 members have about $650 billion worth of spend under management. We have 100 collaboration rooms where people chat and communicate on the daily. In fact, they're in there chatting right now. So the ecosystem of Procurement Foundry doesn't stop just because we're having a conference with 350 people. And we've got 24 regional chapters. We're probably going to host somewhere between 50 and 100 events this year, between conferences and AMA events and panel discussions, things like that. We do daily squad ups, which is rooms where you can just throw a topic on the table and people and your peers can chomp on those. And also we've done all of this in less than just over a year. We're 1 year and 1 week old. So we're really excited about the growth. Just want to take a second to thank the team. This has been a lot of work, and Sarah knows that. And all of the panelists, and all the speakers, and all the hosts. It takes a village to put one of these things on. So thanks to everybody who's done that. We've got amazing sponsors. We'd like to thank those sponsors: Access Global Logistics, and Suchi, and Cloud Managed Networks, and Ships with Sarah's Ships. And also to you, the attendees, we'd like to thank you very much for making this a success as well. So with that, I think I'll kick it back over to you, Sarah. We can probably get started a little bit early.
So one housekeeping quickly. I'm not live on LinkedIn, just so you know. If you can just check that connection for me.
Yeah.
Because we want our LinkedIn family to see our keynote this morning. So just want to make sure. And for everybody on social media today, we are going to be using the hashtag ForgeSC. So FORGESC. I noticed that there was a comment in Slack this morning about remember your threads. So if you are going to be talking about the event on social media today, use that hashtag ForgeSC. And we've also given you Twitter handles for a lot of the hosts for today, so you can include them in your tweets. A lot of great takeaways and things that you will most likely want to tweet about. So I'm going to
Sarah, just check your LinkedIn. All right, I think we just get connected. Looks like we're connected now, so give that a try too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
One other thing, just to do a little bit more housekeeping with you all, just so that you all know, good, glad to hear
Please.
it. Just so that you all know how this all works, our Forge events are a marriage between our Zoom efforts and our Slack community. So a ton of you are on the Slack community already this morning, up in our different channels. We've got networking rooms, we've got main lobbies. All of our sponsors have have their own interactive booths. They all have events planned for the day. Some of them have giveaways, and also
The
we
startups.
also and we also have the startups who have interactive booths as well. So you can ask them questions. So the way this works is you all receive an email, and there's an interactive downloadable event agenda for the day. If you go and you have that, you can just click on the Zoom meeting that you're going to go to next. So everyone is just individual. So at the end, we will actually come back on and explain to you that this Zoom session will close down, and you'll just go to the next session. We put 15-minute breaks in between all of them so that you can collaborate and network, and you can also have a bio break in between or check your email because we know how busy you are. All of our sessions are recorded, and they'll be all put up into our private YouTube library for the Procurement Foundry as well, in case you happen to miss an event, because we do have some sessions throughout the day where there's 2 sessions going on at the same time. So just a little bit of housekeeping on all of that, and I think that's probably it for me.
Yeah, and I think we should kickstart it with Peter, because we've got a lot to get to before 10 a.m. this morning, right, Peter?
Absolutely.
All right. So before I turn it over to Peter, he's going to be giving us an overview of what the economy looks like now and how it will look like for the next 18 months, plus the status of globalization. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of a background on Peter before he gets started, and then I will turn it over to him. So Peter Hall joined Export Development Canada in November 2004. With over 30 years of experience in economic analysis and forecasting, Mr. Hall is responsible for overseeing EDC's economic analysis, country risk assessment, and corporate research groups. Wow, that's a mouthful. That was good, though. I got through it. In addition to preparing strategic advice for senior management at EDC, Mr. Hall is a featured speaker at conferences, international roundtables, and policy fora, and regularly appears in television, radio, and print media, commenting on the world economy and Canadian international trade issues. He produces a widely circulated print and video weekly commentary covering an eclectic range of current global economic issues. Just so everybody knows, we are going to be keeping the Q&A till the end of the session. There is Q&A at the bottom of the screen for those attending inside the webinar. Please post your questions in there. Plus, Mike and I are going to be also taking a look at LinkedIn and Twitter for any comments or questions that you have there as well, but we are going to leave those till the end. So, Peter, over to you. I know you've got a great presentation, so let's get started.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. Sarah, you and I have worked together in other capacities, your association with FIT and so forth. Mike, I want to congratulate you on what you've done with Procurement Foundry here. I've had a chance to see things in the few days that we've been working together, and this is very impressive. And certainly the promotion that has happened on social media and so forth has connected me with some people who are with us today. We've been having back and forth conversations, so it's all been great. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to reach into your community and to share the things that we're coming up with at Export Development Canada. Well, time is tight, so I am going to go quickly through my talk. I'm really anxious to get to the part where you can ask your questions. And for those who know me, and Sarah and Mike, I think, know me well enough now to know I just love questions. And that's the part of the presentation that I really look forward to, because what I have to say is not necessarily spot on to where it is that you are at. But if you've got a question that you want to ask, chances are there are quite a few other people who have exactly the same question. And so I'm really keen to get to those things. Now, my presentation is going to try to answer the things that I anticipate are really on your minds at the moment. And clearly, what we are up against in terms of supply chains and in terms of businesses and countries and regions around the world is an absolute arresting of activity that I don't believe has a historical precedent. All of the academics that I did and my entire team did, we've got people on our staff with PhDs. They've analyzed everything that moves in their particular field, and nobody can think of an historical event that matches what we are dealing with right now in COVID-19.
Right.
Indeed, what it is doing for all of our economic charts is it has completely changed the scale on all of them. So that all of those big events that we saw in the past, like the recession of 1990 and 91, and like 9/11 and the Asian crisis in the late 1990s, and the Great Recession that we had in 2008, 2009, they almost pale in comparison. We just don't see the same kind of movements in the lines as we are seeing right now. And I'm sure, Mike, that you are seeing this among your clientele, and that supply chains around the world have, of course, been rocked by all of this. And we're left with a pile of questions about, what is this actually going to mean for us in the future? Has this completely undone globalization? Or we're not going to need ships anymore? That's a pretty extreme one, but the reach of this is absolutely phenomenal, and the implications severe. Now, let's remember, we are right down pretty close to the bottom of this crevice, this chasm that we have dropped into at the moment. And the perspective from there is really, really confined. Think about yourself in a tiny little hole looking way, way up, and you see a shaft of light coming through, and all you can see is the tiny little space that you've actually fallen into right now. Well, that's just not the way that we get a perspective on everything that is going on around us and what our world is going to look like when we come out of this. And that's what I'm here to help with today. So I am going to share my screen.
Yeah, we're going to jump off the screen and let you have the whole stage. All right.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Peter.
And we are going to go here, and I am going to share, and we will be in business. All right, can everybody, Mike, can you tell me if we can see my title slide here, COVID-19 and the Future of Supply Chain Management?
Yep, everybody can see it.
Awesome, that's great, thank you. Okay, so let's launch right into things. Let's pick on something that is very connected to internationalization and to the crash that we have actually seen. And you hate to use that word when you're talking about air travel, but that's exactly what has happened. We see a 75% industry-wide decline. Folks, have you ever experienced anything like this in your life, where an entire industry goes down 75% and stays there? There has been no improvement in this as we go forward. This is devastating. And it's not just air travel, it's not just tourism. This is a euphemism for what is happening around the world and what it is that we're all dealing with. When labor markets, as you can see in the slide here, crash by as much as we are seeing right now, and I don't know what's actually happened to me, these lines should be a little bit better lined up because they are happening simultaneously. Something's happened in the translation here, but just imagine that these lines are superimposed on each other. When you see lots of wiggles, including a prior recession, happening on a chart like this, and then in an instant, in a matter of 2 months, you see absolute carnage on labor markets, you know that you're in serious trouble. If this many people are actually out of the labor force, if we've gone from, in the United States, unemployment rates that are around 3.5%, and we've zoomed up to over 14%. And if we've gone from 5.5% in Canada to something north of 14% in 2 mere months, I can't tell you any other period of time when this has happened. Now, okay, we're talking about supply chains here. Why are you talking about labor markets? Well, folks, consumers around the world are the most potent force in any economy. In most economies, they account for 60% of GDP. In our number one customer in the United States, they account for 70% of GDP. 70% of GDP, the consumer alone. And so when something like this happens to the abilities that consumers have to pay for things, you know that you are rocked pretty seriously. All right, so let's walk a little bit through what's happening to the world economy and how we think this game is going to end. I'm going to take you back to a position in your life that you might be really uncomfortable with. This is a blackboard here, and this is a two-space graph. I am plotting GDP against time, and that pink line that you see there is an indication of the strength that the economy had prior to us getting into this debacle. And so we had every reason to believe that 2020 was going to be a fantastic year. And you think, okay, well, we spent most of 2019 wondering if we were going to fall into recession. Give your head a shake, Mr. Economist. Like, do you really believe that that's the case? Well, let's think about this. As we approach the end of last year, the numbers really started to improve, and people started to say, hey, maybe we're not going to have a recession. And then that magical week of December 9th came along, where three major trade irritants had significant change to them. What happened in the week of December 9th? Well, first of all, we signed the CUSMA deal. So all this worry that we had about no NAFTA and the fact that we weren't going to have a trade deal with our number one customer, remember, we were really, really worried about that, all of us. And lots were out there saying, pundits like me were saying, we're actually not going to have a deal. He's going to really tear it up. He means what he says. And that didn't happen. We got that inked in the week of December 9th. The second thing that happened was the stage one agreement between China and the United States was actually signed. And many people said, oh man, given the saber rattling that the US president and the president of China are having at the moment, this is just never going to happen. That stage one deal happened, fulfilling another of the promises that we had made to our followers that something significant was going to happen before the end of the year. And number three sort of iced the cake. It was an early Christmas present for this guy, because I had said on all three of these fronts, we were going to have something significant happen before the end of the year. And the most significant thing in the Brexit debacle since that divisive 2016 referendum split the nation on this issue, the most definitive thing happened when Boris Johnson secured a very healthy majority government with a promise to move Brexit forward in a conclusive way. Well, you couldn't ask for a better trifecta than that. If you're in the economic world, this was huge for us. So that's why the pink line. All right, so I'm not going to take all the time for every little bit of this chart that I'm going to put together, but I'm going to draw out the scenario for you, because into that almost ideal set of circumstances came this: a massive drop in the economy that we did not see coming. No forecaster saw this, predicted this. Some epidemiologists said that at some point in time, we were going to get hit with something like this, but nobody was ready for this. It happened instantly. It started in China, as you remember, and like a wave, just washed across the rest of the world, infecting every nation, every region of the world, and of course, every industry. And so when you're actually in this downturn, sort of like being on a roller coaster, why do we get thrilled with roller coasters? Well, because as we are plunging downward on a roller coaster, our brain tricks us into thinking that there is no rail on the bottom that's going to catch us. We actually think that we're plunging to our deaths. And that's where the screaming and the hand waving and everything comes from. Even we know rationally that there are rails down there that are going to catch us. Well, the same is very true for the economy. We've never had a situation where everything has gone right down to zero, and that's been the end of everything, economy-wise. There's always a mechanism that catches us. But we forget about that when we are on the downside. And so you get all this rhetoric about how life is never going to be different again, and are we ever going to get out of this? And oh my goodness, it feels very terrible to be falling. And I don't want to belittle any of that. That's a terrifying experience. And many are still nursing wounds, trying to deal with this, trying to make sure that we actually all get through. How does this normally resolve? We normally get something coming up on the other side, and we get back to where it is that we were before. When we go back to the analysis of previous virus events, this happens almost without fail. And I say almost without fail because I don't know, maybe there was something back in history that didn't see this kind of thing happen, but we haven't been able to find one. We haven't been able to find any incident of this. We've gone right back to the 1918-19 Spanish flu pandemic. We've looked at SARS, Zika, H1N1, a few other viruses as well, and have not found a situation where the economy did not get back to levels that it was operating at prior to the virus actually occurring. Now, that should be very assuring to everybody here. But the question is, how is that path actually going to be determined? That can be done in very different ways. Well, I'm a little ahead of myself. So let's trace out actually going on here. When we actually see this part here where the economy is coming back, you can get back to the line and think, okay, well, everything's back to normal again, except you've lost all of this. Like all of that is just pure dead weight loss for you. Typically, what we actually see happening is you get something like this happening, where you actually overshoot for a while and gain back some of what it is that you lost. And so that is something that we can look forward to as well. Now, you might say, you're dreaming in Technicolor, pal. This isn't the way that things happen. Well, check that thought at the door, because when you're down actually in the chasm, and this is actually happening to you here, that's actually a period of time where a lot of people are not laid off. There are a substantial number of people that still are doing their jobs. They're still drawing a paycheck, but they're not commuting to work. They're not going out to restaurants. They're certainly not going to shows or sporting events, and they've canceled all their vacation plans and a host of other things. My question to you is, what happens to all of that money? Well, we're tracing that right now, because the Bank of Canada, Statistics Canada, and statistical agencies around the world are counting the amount of money that's accumulating in people's bank accounts. And let me tell you one thing, it is very, very substantial. And what happens when we pop through this thing is that money's just sitting there. People might not feel like spending it right away, but eventually they do something like this, where they actually overshoot. That money washes into the economy, spins around the economy in what we call what we call a multiplier effect, and that actually causes a rush of activity to occur. So there are two questions we really need to wrap our minds around with respect to this. First of all, what is the depth that we were actually falling to here? And second of all, what is the duration of this particular activity? We all want to know the answers to those questions. And so let's go back to the chart. Let's rub it all out, except for these few lines here, and say, okay, well, how do we expect that to actually occur? Well, this is our classic V-shaped recovery. You go down really fast and you come up really fast. And everybody says, what was that hit us? It was really hard, but it's now over. And we've almost forgotten that it's occurred. And many people initially were saying, the IMF, the IIF, they were out there saying, okay, this looks like a classic V-shaped recovery kind of thing. Many are not in that camp right now. Some have actually veered further than that. And they've said, ooh, we think that we're going to be in the chasm for a little bit longer. So here in this case, you actually hit bottom and you stay there for a while. And the danger with this is that it plays around with our psychology, and that sharp upturn doesn't actually occur. Now, we believe that there is a huge likelihood of that upturn occurring in either a V or this classic U-shaped recovery situation here. Why is that? Because we did not come into this downturn with pre-recession conditions in the economy. That is a fundamental point to understand. We came in actually with strong evidence of pent-up demand in the United States and in Western Europe. Time does not permit me to go into the justification for that, but that would be a dandy question. If you want to say, you know, Peter, I'm just not there. I don't believe that there was pent-up demand ahead of this. And by the way, pent-up demand is like anti-recession. This is telling you, man, you haven't recovered properly. You still are anticipating a rush of activity in the economy, even 10 years beyond the global financial crisis. That's absolutely where we are. If you want to nail me to the wall on that one, you can absolutely ask me that question. I'd be delighted to answer it for you. That's why we believe the upturn is going to happen, whether we have a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery. That's why we don't think this one here, the dreaded L-shaped recovery, is really what is going to occur here, because you really need a pre-recession bubble to keep you down for that long. That's what happened, by the way, in the global financial crisis. That is not what we expect to happen this year. Very low probability of an L-shaped recovery. Well, on to this, they get a little bit more exotic. And here, I'm going to throw a wiggle your way. This little pink line here that dips below the curve, what on earth is that? Well, that's sort of our lazy W-shaped forecast. That means that you recover. You have a nice sharp recovery. You almost get back to level, and you dip back down again. Why is that? Because you have a second wave of infections actually occurring. And we see that happening right now. And a lot of people are trotting out their W-shaped forecasts at the moment because they believe that some variation of this is going to happen. The OECD has created a downside scenario that actually looks like this. Why am I going into all of this, by the way? Because the shape of the recovery is going to be essential to all of the implications for supply chains as we go forward. So bear with me as I go through all of this, because it is absolutely crucial to understand how it is that we are going to emerge. It's going to have everything to do with what supply chains look like we come out the other end. So the W-shaped forecast. So you get a reinfection that actually occurs and a ring fencing of that. You don't have full shutdown, so the economy doesn't go right back down to the bottom again. You have a small dip and then you get back up to the line. Just takes a little bit longer to get back to those pre-COVID levels. So that's an alternative that people are looking at. So you're all asking, okay, Peter, so which one of these is yours? What do you think is actually going to happen here? Give me EDC's forecast. And here you go. We're not any of these. We're a variation of those. And this green line is the checkmark forecast. So what do we mean by that? Well, the down is the same as the down that everybody is experiencing. And then we get a quick V-shaped recovery, and it goes on, but it does not fully complete itself. The reinfections that we actually see, I don't want to call them that actually, the second wave of infections, because it's not people that have got it that are getting it again. This is people that haven't had it that are actually getting it. So the second wave of infections slows the economy's march back to pre-COVID levels of activity. And that's what we see inside of our green checkmark there. Okay, so end of chalkboard here. If you've got any questions about that, more than happy to discuss them. Let's get on to EDC's forecast. And by the way, quick secret, this doesn't actually go public until Friday. So you guys are getting a sneak peek of this just for you. So what it is it that we're actually looking like? Well, you can see certain outlooks by country, but cast your eyes to the right side of this page. We have a world that we believe is declining by 4.3% this year. And I can't tell you just how devastating that is. In a recession, you don't necessarily get a world economy that is actually falling in a given year. You got all those emerging markets out there that have phenomenal rates of growth. You know, in some cases, 3 or 4% to them, 3 or 4% growth to them is a recession. And so they help to tide us through. And sometimes you see something that's very close to zero, but not negative, not nearly this negative. So from January 1st, where we thought that we were going to have a world economy that was going to grow somewhere between 3 and 4%, we've now got an economy that's declining by more than that. And so this is devastating for the world. For the developed economies, they're the ones that are really taking it on the chin. A 5.4% drop there, a 3.6% drop in emerging markets. Now, for them, a 3.6% drop against the expectations of 8 and 9% growth in some cases for very big emerging market economies. This is shell shock for them. You know, a China, you can see the China number there at minus 1.6. You know, that was not on anybody's radar screen, right from the top leaders right down to the bottom rungs of the economy. No way, that was not in anybody's psyche. 3.6% drop for India, devastating for them as well. They were expecting something on the order of 8% this year. So a huge change in activity. You can see Latin America suffering, both Mexico and Brazil not doing well there, and Western Europe, of course, getting caught up in the throes of this. Now, what does a check mark recovery look like? You might think, okay, well, it sounds a bit like, you know, you get an initial kick, but it's a bit of dead cat bounce. You know, you don't really get anything happening there. Well, brace yourselves for this one, because these numbers are looking quite spectacular. A 6.9% rebound globally. That doesn't get us to pre-COVID levels of activity, by the way, until we get to the end of 2021. And so you can see the enormous change in activity that you're seeing right across the world here. 6.1% for the developed world, but our number one customer, the US, up 6.9%. We get a 7.2% ride as we go forward. Now, we're getting hammered this year, and so we don't look quite as good in the grand scheme of things as that 7.2% would suggest. Look at some of those numbers over in Western Europe as well. France at 8.3%, Germany at 5.9%, and look at China and India, of course, 10% and 11.1. So you might think, oh, there's a lot of business there to be had, but that just doesn't sound reasonable to me. Like, how on earth could we see something like this happen? Well, these are just the same numbers in a table here, and they give us a sense of different sense of how we compare with the rest of the world and how this dynamic actually works. So how do you turn a 4.3% drop into a 6.9% recovery there? Well, it's almost a situation with the harder you fall, the sharper the bounce in the economy. We're not doing anything radical here to our numbers, by the way. And we among Canadian forecasters are some of the most bearish that are out there. This is just what an economy does when it shuts down completely and then comes back on again. And I know there are cynics in the crowd that are saying there, I just don't see this happening. I don't see this happening in my business. And there are certain businesses out there that we won't see this happen in. And you're absolutely right. There are certain businesses that are not going to do as well. Oil and gas is not going to rebound as quickly as the rest. They were unfortunately in a situation of excess supply, grievous excess supply before all of this. So they're going to take a while. They're going to limp out of this. The tourism industry is going to have a really hard time coming out of this as well. But there are many other sectors of the economy that are doing phenomenally well right now. The clothing and footwear side of things, if you happen to be in that supply chain, I'm sure you're quite busy right now because the rush back to replenishing wardrobes and so forth is really enervating that industry. If you're anywhere in the food supply chain, well, that's one that has almost been untouched throughout all of this. It has experienced its downs, but it's nothing like most of what everybody else is facing. And in fact, inside of that industry, the challenge has been to keep up with stocking and to make sure that product is actually there. So there will be very different experiences industry by industry. I'm more than happy to take questions on that as we go forward. Very quickly, here's some numbers for you. Canadian dollar not moving around very much here, and interest rates, of course, on hold for the foreseeable future. We do not see big movements in interest rates kicking out to 2 or 3 years from now, the first modest movements actually occurring. So financing rates will remain low as we go forward. And as long as you are solvent, as long as you have a business case, you should be able to get a good rate on those borrowings. And again, over this period of time, because of those low interest rates, we won't have upward pressure on our Canadian currency. So it running pretty flat as well. And the currency being kept flat also by flat commodity prices. You can see right across the spectrum here, we are not expecting huge lift to happen. If you think that $41 oil by the time we get to 2021 is great shakes, just remember we started at 55. It's going to take us an awfully long time to get back to that point in time. And you can see that right through the spectrum, the same thing actually happening here. The only one that's actually going downwards is precious metals. They're elevated at the moment because of the risks. Okay, so let's get on to the meat of this presentation then. All of that was build up for the strategic considerations that we have in front of us at the moment. What is going to happen to supply chains? What is going to happen to globalization as we go forward? So hang with me a few more minutes because this is where it gets really rich and juicy. The keys strategically for all of your companies to keep your eyes on is what is going to change and what is not going to change. You need to build yourself 2 columns there and decide for yourself what your perspective is on what is going to change and what is not going to change. I'm going to give you some thoughts that I hope are provocative here. First of all, what won't change is that the recovery will be aggressive, whatever shape it takes. When that upsurge actually happens, because of pent-up demand, it's going to be aggressive. And that aggressive growth takes everybody by surprise. Some businesses have gone bankrupt. Some supply chains have become unraveled. Some people have just gotten rusty over this period of time. Others just can't get the liquidity to get going. There are rigidities inside of the system. And when the rush of activity actually happens, not everybody can keep up. So prices start to rise. There are opportunities to be had here for those who are actually ready for the rush of activity. And the rush is self-reinforcing. When some see, wow, something is happening out there, again, they get thinking, okay, well, I've got to get my position in line because I've got to secure what's there. It doesn't matter whether you're way upstream in the supply chain or whether you're retail and you're right at the end of the supply chain. This activity is actually something that if you're ready for it, you can really capitalize on in a big way. I wouldn't be surprised to see some modest inflation over this period of time, by the way. So you will have some pricing power as the rush back happens. That's probably what I'm going to get most questions on. Second of all, there is going to be more virtual activity. We're all trying out tools like the ones that we're using right now, and we're getting pretty good at that. And I think that that is actually going to speed things up. If you thought your supply chain was really fast now, this virtual activity is actually increasing our productivity in a huge way. We're not going to forget that as we come through this whole thing. So I do believe that this is something that we need to arm ourselves with. We need to know what the technology is, and we need to be ready for that. We need to be ready to respond in real time because, of course, our customers are going to be even more demanding than they are now. Thirdly, I would say we can expect increased mechanization. Now, this is a biggie because what is happening right now is that all those businesses that have been parked for a while have senior leaders who have been thinking all the way along. And they're saying, okay, first of all, I got to figure out how I'm going to survive. But now I've got the space to think about all of those things that I wanted to think about before. How would I retool my business? Now, as these leaders are thinking about, as you are thinking about what the shape of the world is going to be in the future, you're thinking also about supply chain risk. You're saying to yourself, do I ever want to go through a COVID-19 experience again in my lifetime? I'm not sure that I do. How would I reconfigure my business? I'm talking to some CEOs who are saying, look, Peter, I'm just not going to take this kind of chance anymore. I'm producing in 7 countries right now. And for my North American sales, I just can't afford to be halfway across the world. I can't afford to be in Europe. I can't afford to be in the Pacific. I've got to consolidate my supply chains and I've got to make them North American. And they're saying this to me. And at the same time, I'm saying, okay, but what about your Chinese sales? They said, well, the same is true for those. I can't afford to be producing here to ship across the Pacific to service my Chinese market or my Indian market or my Southeast Asian market or my European market. I've got to actually be located there if I'm going to mitigate my supply chain risk. So we're seeing something that's looking like what was called back in the global financial crisis times, globalization. Globalization isn't ending, but it's becoming more localized. So globalization is something that is being considered again. And we believe that localizing things more in a high-cost market like Canada or the United States, maybe we could use Mexico, it's a lower-cost market. But if we were actually relocating to the home base, well, we would need to mechanize more. And why is that? Well, technology has been increasing exponentially, and everybody's thinking about leveraging new, cheaper technologies, and technology costs the same around the world. There's no advantage to being in India when it comes to a technical process. There's no advantage to being in China. There's no disadvantage to being in Canada. And firms are thinking about that right now. So if they're thinking about consolidating and localizing their production, they are also thinking about mechanization. And you need to be thinking about that as well, because if you're dealing with them, then the interface that you have with them has to be sympathetic to the new digitization, robotic processes, artificial intelligence processes that they're putting together. A fourth consideration is, look, price efficiency is still going to be paramount. If it still makes sense to have a labor-intensive process and produce halfway around the world, people are still going to do that. I'm running out of time here, so I'm glossing over this one quickly, but there are a lot of global supply chains that are going to remain absolutely intact. And there's a second reason for that. Point number 5 is that as we rush back to activity, capacity pressures are going to be a huge factor. Just imagine a world where everybody wants to retool right away. Do you think there's capacity to actually do that? No, businesses are trying to serve this rush of reorders that nobody expected was going to happen. And as they come in, it's like, well, what capacity do we have right now? Well, it's the existing supply chain that we have. That's going to be the first line of defense. So folks, don't sweat it. Original in-place supply chains right now are going to be the first line of defense for all companies. And they're actually going to create a window of time where these companies are going to say, well, I had these radical thoughts when COVID-19 was on, but my supply chain is actually working quite well right now, and I can't build a new one instantly. And so I think I'm just going to stick with this one. So not everybody is going to convert. Not everybody is going to reshore or nearshore or globalize their business. There are still going to be supply chains, and there still is going to be globalization as we go forward. And by the way, I don't believe policy or protectionism is going to, negative trade policy or protectionism is going to interrupt this. Because I've believed all the way along that all this protectionism is really about getting a better deal. It's not about undermining or blowing up globalization going forward. And again, you may want to ask me questions about that as well. I do believe that trade and the investment that goes along with it will resume after this debacle is over. And we really need to get our minds around what the shape and the sequence of recovery is going to be. Okay, let's just talk more specifically about supply chains now, give you some specifics here, and then we'll be done. So initially, from what we've just said in the previous chart there, initially things are going to be much the same. And I've already justified that, I believe, so I'm not going to elaborate on this anymore. What you see right now is really what you're going to get in the initial throes of the world economy coming back again. And a lot of it is going to remain the same. But eventually, there is going to be reshoring and there is going to be nearshoring. Efficiency and risk management are going to take us to that point. And we need to be ready and malleable to move with the companies that are actually moving. It's the well-heeled ones, the big supply chains that are out there that we are in, the large OEMs with conglomerate activity that are going to be able to afford this before anybody else. And so those are the ones that you want to actually follow first. So there will be domestic implications. We'll really have to arrange ourselves around what I believe ultimately is going to be a more intense local supply chain. And by local, I really am talking here about North America. But what about the international implications? Well, just as I've said, we are increasingly finding sales in other countries, far-flung countries, because that's where the balance of global growth is shifting. Don't get me talking about the rise of the emerging market middle class, but it is really the driver behind all of this. And studies that Canadians have done, high-ranking Canadians have done, have shown that the emerging market middle class is rising by over 100 million a year, 3 times Canadian population, newly graduating into the middle class every year, newly wealthy, consuming more, consuming higher quality things that we produce. And we're increasingly having to service that. Well, firms, companies, institutions that are not following that activity into the future are really going to be left behind. So the international implications of all that's going on for us right now is going to be a shift to localize the production supply chains of the things that are going to the fastest growing markets in the world. And we need to sharpen our pencils and be ready for that activity as well. Because if that is really going to occur, then our supply chains are going to have to move in ways that they haven't moved before. Next, the impact of technology. So the increase of digitization and blockchain, it's only going to be enhanced by all of this. I mean, we don't like trading paper money. We don't like high touch kinds of ways of transacting. And our supply chains have long been beyond that. But I believe that this is going to give an extra boost to blockchain and the integration of monetary systems around the world in a way that we really need to keep up with. If we don't keep up with this kind of thing, then our competitors will, and we need to be very sharp with respect to all of this. So mechanization and location, I've already unpacked that one. This is one that I really want to leave with you as well. The transformation of the business creation model. I really do believe that this is where we're going in the future because, folks, we don't just have an aging of the population problem in Canada. They don't just have one in the United States or Western Europe. China has an aging of the population problem. Many emerging markets are exactly the same. Population control measures that have been taken mean that we have a global population that is aging. And increasingly, in order to keep up our standard of living, we are going to have to mechanize as we go forward. So this increased move to digitization, to artificial intelligence, to robotic technology, to data pools that are doing a lot of the thinking for us and so forth, that's really where I believe supply chains are going to go as we go into the future. So the emphasis on us keeping up and actually trying to establish new frontiers in the technical management of our supply chains is paramount as we go forward. So those are the things that I wanted to share with you. Here's my disclosure statement. I've got to show that to you. This is my final slide, and I'm ready now to take any of the questions that you have. Thank you so much for patiently listening to all that I've shared with you today. I sure hope that it's been something that's been useful to you as you go forward. And certainly I and EDC remain very ready to serve you in any way, shape, or form that we can, either with our financing products or insurance products to guarantee that you're going to get paid for all these international supply chain transactions that you're involved in, and also from my particular purview on the knowledge side. If we can help you with country intelligence, we monitor over 200 countries around the world. My shop alone creates 7 ratings per country. We do a lot of risk analysis on those so that you don't have to. As we say as a corporation, you know, we take on the risk so that you can take on the world. We really stand by that and mean what we say. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I believe I'm either passing it back to Sarah or Mike right now. So back to you folks to navigate our question and answer period. Thanks again.
Thank you, Peter. That was amazing. Mike? Oh, you're on mute.
Mike is speechless.
You literally got me speechless. I'm
that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'm looking at all the folks on LinkedIn. I'm looking at all the folks on in the room. The content is fantastic. I knew it was going to be great and very, very thought provoking.
All right, let's
around the dip. So let's get into Q&A because we got a ton of Q&A.
We got a lot. We do have a lot. Okay, so we're going to start with Anil. You spoke of the multiplier effect. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh boy, you're a glutton for punishment, Anil, because I'm going to take you right back to Economics 100. What happens here is that, you know, when somebody gets a paycheck, they say to themselves, okay, well, I'm going to save a certain portion of this, but I'm going to spend a certain portion of this. And of course, now we've got this pile up of savings that is quite substantial, and people are going to be going out into the economy. So basically, they spend, let's say, $1, and that becomes somebody else's income once it's transacted. And that person says, okay, I just earned $1. And so I'm going to save 20% of that, let's say, and 80% of that I'm going to go out and spend. And so they spend their 80 cents, and somebody else gets 80 cents of income, and they say, oh, good, I've got 80 cents of income. I'm going to park 20% of this 80 cents, and I'm going to take the balance, and I'm going to spend it out there in the economy. And it multiplies out there the more these transactions actually occur. Well, this pile of money that's going to dump into the economy is going to have exactly that effect. So once the money circulates throughout the economy, you can get a multiplier on the initial load of money that is there of 1.4, 1.5 times. And so that's how that actually occurs. Once you've done the first transaction, that's not where the game ends. That initial expenditure there has a long lifetime until it stops actually injecting stuff into the economy. So that's something that happens in every economy. And, you know, the bonus for Canada is that, you know, you might say, okay, well, when we go out there and consume, we're spending on a lot of imports. So that's leaking out of the economy. That's true, but COVID hit everybody. So the same people that are actually buying the stuff that Canada produces all around the world, that same multiplier effect will actually kick in there as well. So that's probably more than you were expecting to get from me, but that's how the multiplier effect works. And, you know, awesome. As theoretical as it might seem in an Economics 100 class, it's actually very real where the rubber meets the road out there in the economy.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. So we've got a question from the audience, Caroline from BizClick Media. For companies that choose not to localize part or all of their supply chain, is there any strategic way to mitigate the supply risk other than inventory management?
Well, there certainly is. Thank you for that question. And that's almost like a perfectly served up question for somebody from Export Development Canada, because that's exactly why we have created the spate of products that we have at the moment. So let's just talk about the very basic entry-level product that we have, accounts receivable insurance. So if you are dealing with an unknown customer halfway around the world, and you're going to maintain your supply chain with those because you don't have a whole lot of option, and you're worried either because of COVID-19 or other things that are happening in the economy that you're not going to get paid. If you qualify, EDC will make sure that you get at least 90% of what's coming back to you. and you won't be wiped out by that particular transaction. We'll get 90% of the money, we'll cut a check for you, we'll get that into your bank account, you'll have that, and we'll go after the remaining 10%. And we're pretty successful at doing that because we carry the flag with us. We're a crown corporation, and nobody likes to take on a sovereign nation, especially Canada, being as aggressive as our nature is. No, I'm just kidding. So that's what we provide. And we've got a whole other range of products as well, from different guarantee structures that we have. And we're actually executing the federal government's BCAP program and the CEBA program as well. We're working together with financial institutions and using our guarantee products to actually do that. So they're highly regarded. They work very well. They're very interactive with your financial institution. And then, of course, if there is trouble locking up financing for that, your financial institution doesn't want to do that, well, EDC offers financing as well. That's a quick tour of how it is that EDC helps to mitigate the risks of small, medium, and large-sized businesses, Canadian businesses that are transacting with the rest of the world.
Awesome. Thank you. Krissa says, as companies look to minimize risks in their supply chains, what factors do you think will be most critical in assessing the cost benefit of near or reshoring versus the lower costs of labor, technology, and capital investment needed to keep supply chains overseas? Are there specific industries that you believe cannot or should not near or reshore? In my personal experience, I've heard that for some of the technology companies, like Apple, that have ecosystems in China, it could be very difficult, but I'll leave that one over to you.
Sure, it really depends on the industry, and that's not a cop-out question. You can have everything from sort of cut and sew and t-shirt making and so forth, which is highly dependent on labor, that hasn't reinvented its model to the point where computers are actually custom cutting cloth and giving you form fitting this, that, and the other. That's coming. You know, technology is getting better and better at being able to manage that kind of thing, but it's still more economical to do it in a labor intensive way, to actually have the human skilled person working on this and to source that through different parts of the world. So we're not looking at instant change actually happening there, but let's face it, we have never seen technological change like we see now, in terms of the exponential increase of that. And to me, that's a threat to every industry, because you're just one breakthrough away from being displaced, from being essentially a labor-intensive sort of construct to being something that's done completely mechanically. And that's getting cheaper and cheaper over time, of course, because of the advent of technology. The phenomenal gains that can be made from breakthroughs means that the research and development is unstoppable. And so we tell every firm, look, there's no such thing as a low-tech industry anymore. Everybody is a high-tech industry. Don't think about high-tech as being something that's out there and on its own. Everybody is high-tech, and we need to mitigate our risks by paying attention to becoming more high-tech over time. Now, like I said before, it's not going to happen instantly. It's a trend, and something like COVID comes along and gives it a jump start and actually takes it to a new level. I like to say that, you know, the normal course of things is necessity is the mother of invention. Crisis is the mother of transformation. That's when you see the big jumps actually happen. And that's what we have to watch out for on the technical front.
Yeah. Anna McGovern also asked about home and personal care as well as beauty. Do you see those moving locally as well?
You know, it's a funny thing. When we were analyzing the economy back in our principles classes, back when I was wearing short pants, you know, one of the things that we used to say was, well, like, you know, there's certain services that will just never be tradable. And the classic is a haircut. Now, I've just got my brand new, you know, post-COVID haircut. And so I'm feeling pretty good about things right now. I feel like 10 pounds lighter. I was a scary dude to look at just yesterday, but you know, haircuts are the kind of thing that just have to be done locally, right? Except that's not true anymore. We've got our technology put to the point where we can do remote surgery. You know, a doctor could be working on a table and doing a very delicate operation halfway around the world through cameras and so forth. Well, I'm not sure that it's economic to do this yet, but I imagine that if you can poke around in somebody's innards, doing things to them that are life-threatening, surely to goodness, somebody can be snipping away over in Italy there, and a box could be on your head, and they're actually giving you a custom cut remotely. And so there is really no stopping technology in terms of what it can do to us and how it's transforming things going forward. So there is going to be, I believe in the near future, no such thing as a purely local offering. And so all kinds of services, personal services that were by definition local kinds of things don't need to be. The experience can actually be exported. And, I do think that there is going to be more and more displacement that happens over time. I'm not sure if I hit that question right on the head there, but I took it down this road, and I hope that was useful.
Yeah, and I was in on a conversation the other day about trade missions also going virtually. And so it's going to give even small to medium-sized businesses the opportunity to go more global as well, which is amazing, from the
Sarah,
technology
that's
standpoint.
just it. That is just it. What this is, people see the threat side of this all of the time, but the opportunity side of this is that it has never been less costly for a small business to interact with the rest of the world than it is now. And it's really the advent of technology that's the great leveler. So people talk about greater concentration in the economies of scale that are unfair for small and medium-sized businesses at the moment. And I just think to myself, there's nothing that is actually stopping a small business from coming up with a breakthrough that makes it one of these big business displacers. I mean, the point of a small business is to become a large business, I think. And so some of those businesses that are large right now were small businesses. But this is a world that I think gives more opportunities to small businesses than we've ever known before.
So we've got 2 minutes left. Mike, I don't know if you've got, I've got some questions still on LinkedIn. We've got some questions still on Q&A. I think what we're going to do is, obviously we've put up Peter's Twitter handle on the interactive session agenda. And people can also connect with Peter on LinkedIn. So for any of the questions that we didn't get to, we will, you can connect with him directly on Twitter and LinkedIn. I think you might be on Slack, but we are also transitioning onto another event. So, Mike?
Yeah. One thing, if I know there's a lot of other questions, Peter. Thank you. That was amazing content. If you do get a chance after your event to come back in, our networking lounge in our community is going to be open all day and into tomorrow as well. So if you want to jump back in, and if you have time, I know that the networking lounge is flying, by the way. I'm just watching it. So if you do have a chance to come back in, we'd love to have you back in, and that's where a lot of people get to interact with you, but also on Twitter and all the other things. So thank you so much. That was really, really enlightening, and I definitely will go back and watch this again.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's my pleasure.
I personally have about 5 questions.
Okay. Well, we can take that offline, Mike, anytime. But thank you again so much for having me today. It was a real pleasure, and if I can, I will certainly jump back in. I've got something that's going to keep me busy for the next hour, but if I can jump in after that hour, then that would be great.
That'd be
awesome.
Best of luck to everybody. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Really, really appreciate that. So I think just for everybody in the event today, we're going to close this out. If you want to go back into the networking lounge in Slack to make the most of the day, remember to go and check out all of the additional channels for all of our sponsors, as well as all the startup showcase to start some dialogue before we really dive into the day. Your interactive session agenda is in the main lobby, and you're going to have easy to access buttons to get to your next session. And we also have a support and feedback channel if you need any help with anything. And I think we've got about 15 minutes for networking, right, Mike?
Yeah, you got about 15 minutes till the next session, so you can jump out, you can go into Networking Lounge, you can go see the folks at Suchi or Access Global or Cloud Managed. Like I said earlier, those folks are having events inside of their channels today too. Some product demos, some meet the CEOs, a couple of giveaways I think are happening as well. I think there's some interesting things that folks are giving away, and they're there to talk to you as well. So enjoy the day. If you've got questions, jump into the support and help desk. That's what Tina's there for all day. And we look forward to continuing the day in the next breakout sessions in 15 minutes.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.